class. Welcome back to Biomedical Ethics. This week we will be focusing, or we have been focusing on, one of the most contentious issues in biomedical ethics today, and that is the ethical questions that arise concerning abortion and concerning reproductive health more generally as well. On Monday, we placed the debate in context, looking at views on terminating a pregnancy from the ancient Greeks all the way up through English common law and currently to positions that are taken and discussed in the court system today in the U.S. context. We looked at Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, etc. Today, we'll be shifting our focus and looking at different ethical positions that are argued concerning abortion. And bioethicists have been discussing this topic since the birth of bioethics proper. And there are several bioethicists on all sides of the debate, utilizing arguments in support of their positions. So today we'll be looking at different arguments, especially those coming out of the pro-choice and the pro-life camps, and we'll be dissecting them or looking at how they work, what premises are being marshaled. And what we'll see is that there are actually quite a few ethical principles that are held by people on various sides of the debate. But the question concerning personhood, the question that we've been discussing since the Greeks, discussions concerning quickening, etc., these play an important role in arguments concerning abortion. So class today will be structured as follows. I briefly would like to introduce you to two important argument types, equivocation and the slippery slope argument, that you will often find being utilized in debates concerning pregnancy, in reproductive health debates. So these are meant to be added to your toolbox so that you can use them to analyze arguments today and in the future. Then we'll be looking at the basic structure of common pro-life and pro-choice arguments, and we'll be looking at similarities and distinctions between the two. Interestingly, when we break them down into certain premises held, there is a lot of cross connection, but there are also some distinct differences. So what is bringing about the contentious conflict here? We'll be looking at that. And I'm particularly excited to look at this topic because the arguments are so robust, so we can sink our teeth into them. And we should discuss, then we'll move on to discuss how defining personhood plays a key role in arguments both coming out of the pro-choice and pro-life camps. And then I'll be pointing you towards a case study concerning what it means to be human. How do we define this? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live a good life? All of these questions are normative, but they're also factual, right? What does it mean to be a human? How do we determine whether or not someone has personhood? These are important questions that we'll sort of engage with. So let's go down the rabbit hole and look at the various arguments that are being marshaled. And believe me, argument, counter argument, the discussion is robust. So I'm looking forward to exploring this with you. All right, this week, as I said, we'll be finishing up abortion. Next week, we'll be turning our attention to reproductive technology, specifically IVF and surrogate mothering. So stay tuned for that. The midterm is this week, so be sure to be ready for it on Friday, just a reminder. And if you haven't begun studying yet, please look over your slides. And remember, I will be making it available on noon on Friday, and it will be available until midnight. Once you begin the midterm, you will have 3 hours to complete it. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right, so let's look at two important argument types that play important or key roles in arguments concerning, or the discussion concerning pregnancies. The first is called a slippery slope argument. This is an argument where a party asserts that a relatively small first step leads to a chain of related events culminating in some significant and usually negative effect, right? So I did A, but then if A happens, then B happens. And if B happens, then C happens. And if C happens, then D happens. And D, nobody wants D to happen. Oh no. So I have just a brief little commercial that sort of plays on the slippery slope argument and is actually an example of a slippery slope argument. Oh no. Dang it. It's not playing. Let me see if I can find it on YouTube. I'm going to pause the recording. We are back, and I have found it. Here it is.
You get stressed. When you get stressed, you need to get away. When you need to get away, you go for something exotic. When you go for something exotic, you get bitten by something exotic. When you get bitten by something exotic, things swell up. When things swell up, you can't go home. And when you can't go home, you become a local fisherman they call Big Fatty Face. Don't become a local fisherman they call Big Fatty Face. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV. When you pay too much for cable, you throw things. When you throw things, people think you have anger issues. When people think you have anger issues, your schedule clears up. When your schedule...
Oh, no. Well, you get the idea here. I've been having such issues with my internet today. All right, so I will pause. See, from the one example, you can see A led to B, which led to C, which led to D, which leads to some non-desirable or undesirable conclusion. And this is a fallacious argument because it's not guaranteed that A will lead to B, and B will lead to C, and C will lead to D. But it is a common way or a common argumentative type. So I just wanted to introduce you to slippery slope fallacies in order to help you better identify those, because they are problematic in many ways. However, there's also the reductio ad absurdum argument type, and this literally translates from the Latin, reduce to absurdity. You show that an argument's method or assumptions lead to ridiculous conclusions. And this is not a fallacy. This is actually a valid way to sort of kick the tires of an argument and to see where it leads. If we hold certain premises, what falls from those premises? What would occur? For example, if we accept Singer's argument that consciousness or a certain capability can be bestowed upon animals, then what does this lead? How does this impact agriculture? How does this impact research, etc.? What are sort of the implications of holding a view? So hopefully this video will play. Let us see. And for all of the people who like Big Bang Theory, this is an example of a reductio.
Do you mind if I stay here tonight?
No, yeah, take the couch. Or my bed. I just got new pillows, hypoallergenics.
The couch is good.
Hold that thought. Leonard, a moment.
Let me guess, you have a problem with this.
Where do I begin?
It's up to you. Crazy person's choice.
Well, first, we don't have house guests. Frankly, if I could afford the rent, I'd ask you to leave.
Your friendship means a lot to me as well. What else?
Well, our earthquake supplies. We have a 2-man, 2-day kit.
So,
if there is an earthquake and the 3 of us are trapped here, we could be out of food by tomorrow afternoon.
I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that if we let Penny stay, we might succumb to cannibalism?
No one ever thinks it'll happen until it does.
Penny, if you promise not to chew the flesh off our bones while we sleep, you can stay.
What?
He's engaging in reductio ad absurdum. It's the logical fallacy of extending someone's argument to ridiculous proportions and then criticizing the result, and I do not appreciate it.
I'll get you a blanket and a pillow.
Yeah, so that's an example of a reductio ad absurdum. So Sheldon, I believe, was arguing that because they had a 2-day, 2-person kit, that if they had a third person, they would run out of food earlier. And so um, this could lead to a cannibalism. But what it illustrates is that once you accept certain premises, if they lead to problematic conclusions, then we need to go back and weigh those premises. Are the premises valid? Are the premises doing the work that we need them to do? Should we hold these premises in this situation? So that is literally a reduced to absurdity. Can the argument be reduced to an absurd position or to a position that's problematic and that we wouldn't want to endorse or hold? All right. So I do want to begin by discussing the common ground that abortion arguments typically have, regardless of whether you're taking a pro-choice or pro-life stance or a stance in between. There are so many different positions concerning pregnancy. It's such a rich area. So both pro-choice and pro-life supporters largely accept common ethical principles. Most people except one, that murder is wrong. You're not going to go around knocking on people's doors and ending their lives. We pretty much, in the society in which we live, pretty much all accept murder is an unethical thing to do. It's encoded in our laws and policies, etc. It's something that we just do not do. 2, persons typically have a right to life. You are an autonomous person. Remember the Kantian argument. You are conscious, you make rational decisions. You not only have the right to make rational decisions, but more basically, you have a right to live, right? And therefore to live the life that you want to live and make the choices that guide, say, that life. And 3, personal freedom should not be limited except for very important reasons. And we talked about Mill's harm principle, right? The freedom of another person ends at the tip. Your freedom ends at the tip of another person's nose, right? We can do the various activities that we want to do, most typically, unless it impacts someone else's life, very, very generally. And we can sort of hash each of these out, but there are 3 rules of thumb that are typically accepted in the context of the United States and beyond. So what's going on here? Why is there such a contentious debate? Well, conflict concerning abortion typically arises due to non-moral facts and how these principles, 1, 2, and 3, which are ethical, should be applied in real life. And we'll look at that, at least in the most common arguments. So what I want to do is look at various arguments against abortion, various arguments for abortion. We'll look at the different moving pieces, and we'll discuss whether or not they hold. I'm going to sort of give you a tour. We're going down the rabbit hole. We're going to look at many different arguments, and you can weigh them personally to see which hold for you, which are problematic for you, etc. So a common argument against abortion discussed in the readings has 2 premises and 1 conclusion. Premise 1, the killing of an innocent human being is wrong. Premise 2, the unborn fetus is an innocent human being. Therefore, conclusion, it is wrong to kill the unborn. The killing of an innocent human is wrong. And remember, if we go back, murder is wrong. We agree with that, right? An unborn fetus is an innocent human being, right? Therefore, it's wrong to kill the unborn. And in fact, in the Marquis reading, we saw Don Marquis arguing that killing another human being is wrong because it robs a person of their future, right? And likewise, abortions are wrong because they're violating or removing the future of the fetus, terminating that. And so this seems like a very strong argument. And in fact, we could argue that it is valid. Now, in both of these, murder is wrong. That's definitely sort of coming out of this argument, and most people will agree. Even those who agree or hold an argument for abortion or support abortion pro-choice believe that murder is wrong, and they agree that yes, persons have a right to life. So they accept the two premises that are sort of playing in that initial argument. But they largely push back on how the term human being or person is defined and used in this argument. So they argue that that argument is not valid, indeed, precisely because of how we're defining our terms. So the argument commits the fallacy of equivocation, or it improperly switches the meaning of a word so that we have two definitions in the same sentence, being used in the same sentence. So that word is signifying two different things in the premise. So we have human being meaning one thing in the first premise, and we have human being meaning another thing in the second premise. So this is the third type of argument that I want to add to your toolbox. And as we'll see, it's going to go back and forth, back and forth. We're going to have arguments, counter arguments, arguments, counter arguments, because the topic and the discussion is so rich. So I just have a brief video sort of going over
Welcome back to
equivocation.
Fallacy February with 90-second philosophy and Carneades.org. Today we're going to be starting with fallacies of ambiguity, looking at the fallacy of equivocation. Now, the fallacy of equivocation is basically a fallacy that depends on the double meaning of a word. This is an argument that uses one word to mean two different things, or mistakenly equating two different meanings of one word. Let's take a look at some examples. So, a centipede has 100 feet, therefore a centipede is about a third the size of a football field. Our problem here is clearly we're using two different meanings of the word foot. One is a body part, the other is a method of measurement. The diamond tiara is about 2 pounds, therefore the tiara costs about $3.35. Unless it's a really cheap or fake tiara, it probably doesn't cost that little, and so we're probably talking about weight instead of the pound currency. Some triangles are obtuse, therefore some triangles are not very smart. Here, of course, is the double meaning of obtuse. And the lumberjack gave a felled blow to fell the tree on the fell. Therefore, the lumberjack tripped, killing the tree and landing on an animal skin. Fell has like 6 different meanings. You should check it out. That was equivocation. Also today we're going to be doing the part.
Okay. So that video is very quick, but it provides several examples of equivocation. So equivocation is a fallacious argument type, and if you're using different definitions of a particular key word in an argument, then that's problematic, right? You're not talking about the same thing. So the counter argument against the first argument is that this particular argument is committing the fallacy of equivocation, because in the first premise, human being is defined as someone who has all the attributes and capabilities that we associate with having full rights. But in the second premise, human being is defined as a biologically human entity, right? So we have this robust definition of human being utilized in the first premise, and in the second premise, we're talking about the biological components that determine whether or not you are a human being, right? Or a member of a genetically distinct species. So the pro-choice camp is pushing back against the pro-life argument, arguing that it's fallacious. So what do? Do we just be like, oh yeah, okay, that's good. Glad we figured that out. Well, as you guys know, we're still debating and we're still discussing this topic today. And in fact, it's playing a major role in discussions currently in both bioethics spheres and in social political spheres as well. Well, the pro-life or the anti-abortion replies like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's just improve the argument. Okay, so yes, like there could have been equivocation going on here, but that does not mean that it is then okay to throw everything out. In fact, all we need to do is improve the argument structure, and we're golden. And we got ourselves a valid and sound argument, and boom, and you're going to have to accept it, right? So they added a second, or they edited the second premise. The killing of an innocent person is wrong. 2, The unborn is an innocent person from the moment of conception. And see how definitions of personhood are still playing a major role 2,000 years in the future. The unborn is an innocent person from the moment of conception. Therefore, it is wrong to kill the unborn. Now, this argument is valid, and I misspoke earlier. The first argument structure was not valid because of the issue of equivocation. But here in this edited version, this is a valid argument. So, as we can see from the discussions concerning equivocation and how we define our terms, the main point of contention in at least these dominant arguments concerning pro-life and pro-choice is a disagreement concerning premise 2, or how we should define person. So definitions matter here. And how we define what a person is plays out, has some serious implications concerning what ethical action turns out to be in contexts. So let's turn to what is a person. How should we define what a person is? This is a hard question. What does it mean to be you? So the pro-life argument answers this in a particular way. They argue, well, there's no precise point in the development of a zygote where this entity becomes unmistakably a human being. All right? There's no like, boom, now you're a human being, whereas like 2 seconds ago you were not a human being. Thus, and we talked about how quickening and questions concerning that sort of shift and viability, all of these like determinations are sort of shifting depending on what information we're having in the development of medical technology at the time, right? But we still don't see a precise point where you are a boom human being and not human being. Thus, any point that we choose will be arbitrary and unsupportable. 22.3 weeks, 19.8, 7.2, right? Because there's no precise point. So due to this situation, the most plausible view is that personhood begins at conception. Well, we can argue just like the acorn that turns into an oak tree, the acorn should be considered at least a pseudo oak tree, right? So the most plausible view is that personhood begins at conception. And if personhood begins at conception, if we agree that that is the definition of personhood, then the edited argument holds, right? Now, the pro-choice camp is like, whoa. Personhood beginning at conception? What does it mean to be a person? Well, we want to push back against that argument. And I'm using the we here as that camp, right? And they argue that just because we can't pinpoint the precise moment a fetus becomes a person doesn't mean that there's no difference between the two, right? We do see a difference between an acorn and an oak tree, for example. There's a distinct difference. These are two different things, right? So failure to pinpoint this moment doesn't mean that we need to collapse the distinction or accept that a zygote is a human being. Also, to use a reductio ad absurdum, what about other cells? Our cells have our genetic material. Should all cells then be treated like a person? Because they fit the criteria. So this is a common pro-choice pushback. So we actually don't want to collapse the distinctions. We need to recognize that a zygote is distinct from a person. And then the pro-life group is like, whoa, no, wait a minute. We don't agree with that. And we have our bioethicists, pro-life bioethicists arguing that, potential people should have the same rights as existing people. Yes, we can argue that an acorn is conceptually different from an oak tree, but an acorn is still going to turn into an oak tree, right? And so we should see the acorn as a potential oak tree. and a zygote as a potential person. Right? That just because of these definitional distinctions, it doesn't impact the ethical nature of it. And then we have another counter argument. See, this is like, different positions, different bioethicists coming in with all these different arguments. And I get very excited because of the robustness of the conversation. And the argument against this common pro-life reply is that, well, does the potential to develop a right mean that you should be treated as having that right now? Like, should potential people be given the same rights as current people? And Anne Warren argues that just because you have the potential to become a Supreme Court judge or an astronaut or a president of the United States or a senator or et cetera, or a principal or whatnot, doesn't mean that you should be treated as a judge now. There's a whole process that you need to go through. And in the case of the Supreme Court, you need to be voted in. I mean, there's things that need to be done, in order for you to be a judge, right? Education that needs to be obtained, experience that needs to be garnered, etc. Now, I want to stop here and just ask, and this might be an interesting discussion in the discussion forums. Do you think this is an effective reductio argument? Does this actually effectively push back against the counter reply concerning potential people should have the same rights as existing people? And this is a very much a live question in bioethics proper concerning whether or not this Warren's argument holds. Then the pro-choice position, merely being biologically human, a creature with human DNA, is not sufficient for personhood. And to accept this view would be guilty of speciesism. So they're pushing for a more robust conception of personhood because, yes, DNA is a component of being human. However, we also have other intrinsically valuable traits, such as reason, consciousness, etc. And do we need to? What traits are key to determining personhood? And we can ask here, right? Well, okay, so if we are biologically human, that's not sufficient for personhood. It's a necessary component, but there are other key capabilities or valuable traits that will determine whether or not you are a person. What are those traits? Is it reason? Is it consciousness? Is it the ability to enjoy Taco Bell? I mean, I haven't had lunch yet, so don't mind me. But what are the traits, right? What are the traits that demarcate who is human and who is not human? That is a difficult question. So Warren argues that there are 5 traits that are central to personhood. Consciousness, or the capacity to feel pain, reasoning, self-motivated activity, the capacity to communicate, the presence of self-concepts and self-awareness. And for Warren, to be a person, you need only satisfy one of the criterion above. You need to be conscious, or you need to be able to reason, or you need to have self-motivated activity. Hegel would call this the will that wills, or the capacity to communicate, the presence of self-concepts and self-awareness. And she argues that a fetus satisfies none of the above, and therefore it is not a person and cannot be said to have moral rights. I just want to look. And there are several ways that this has been pushed back against. First, we can question the 5 traits of personhood. Do you agree with Warren here? Are these most central to personhood? And do you agree that to be a person, you need only satisfy one criterion above? And the pro-life arguments and coming out of bioethics will push back on our first premise here. A fetus satisfies none of the above. Does a fetus satisfy none of the above, right? What does scientific inquiry have to say about this, right? So we have one argument, counter argument, back and forth. It's like a bioethical tennis match, right? So, and it's all in search of what it means to be human, right? What it means to be a person. And so the counter argument for Warren, at least the one that we discussed in the reading, is that, well, if killing a fetus is morally permissible because it's not a person, then killing an infant is morally permissible as well. Because we could argue that if we accept the first premise, which again we can push back against, if we accept the first premise, then this also holds for infants. And so, do we want to then reduce this to absurdity? Do we want to then accept that killing infants is also morally permissible? And then the arguments keep on going back and forth, back and forth. Argument, counter argument, argument, counter argument, argument, counter argument. And so I illustrate this, or I sort of wanted to show you the snapshot of key arguments, or at least prominent arguments in bioethics, to illustrate how important questions concerning personhood, how important those factors are in the argument, and also to give you sort of a snapshot into different arguments that are marshaled on all sides. And I'm hoping that you utilize the toolbox and the various principles that we've been discussing throughout class to weigh the various arguments yourself and to pinpoint where you fall in this contentious issue. But as I stated here, the arguments concerning personhood, they just keep on going, and it's very much a live debate. It's a live discussion concerning in biomedical ethics and outside of the medical community proper. So I will be posting this, but I'll leave you with a question. What does it mean to be human for you? What definition do you hold? And there are so many different ways to cash this out. What do you think is the correct one? And you know what? We have about 32 minutes. I'm actually going to show this. It's just a brief 5-minute video, and I am going to leave you with that question.
This is the human test, a test to see if you are a human. Please raise your hand if something applies to you. Are we agreed? Yes? Then let's begin. Have you ever eaten a booger long past your childhood? It's okay, it's safe here. Have you ever made a small, weird sound when you remembered something embarrassing? Have you ever purposely lowercased the first letter of a text in order to come across as sad or disappointed? Okay. Have you ever ended a text with a period as a sign of aggression? Okay. Period. Have you ever laughed or smiled when someone said something shitty to you, and then spent the rest of the day wondering why you reacted that way? Yes. Have you ever seemed to lose your airplane ticket 1,000 times as you walked from the check-in to the gate? Yes. Have you ever put on a pair of pants and then much later realized that there was a loose sock smooshed up against your thigh? Good. Have you ever tried to guess someone else's password so many times that it locked their account? Have you ever had a nagging feeling that one day you will be discovered as a fraud? Yes, it's safe here.
Have you ever hoped that there was some ability you hadn't discovered yet that you were just naturally great at? Have you ever broken something in real life and then found yourself looking for an undo button in real life? Have you ever misplaced your TED badge and then immediately started imagining what a 3-day Vancouver vacation might look like? Have you ever marveled at how someone you thought was so ordinary could suddenly become so beautiful? Have you ever stared at your phone smiling like an idiot while texting with someone? Have you ever subsequently texted that person the phrase, "I'm staring at the phone, smiling like an idiot"? Have you ever been tempted to and then gave in to the temptation of looking through someone else's phone? Have you ever had a conversation with yourself and then suddenly realized you're a real asshole to yourself? Has your phone ever run out of a battery in the middle of an argument and it sort of felt like the phone was breaking up with both of you? Have you ever thought that working on an issue between you was futile because it should just be easier than this, or this is supposed to happen just naturally? Have you ever realized that very little in the long run just happens naturally? Have you ever woken up blissfully and suddenly been flooded by the awful remembrance that someone had left you? Have you ever lost the ability to imagine a future without a person that no longer was in your life? Have you ever looked back on that event with the sad smile of autumn and the realization that futures will happen regardless? Congratulations. You have now completed the test. You are all human.
All right, so this TED Talk sort of tarries with the question of what it means to be human. And it gives us several different potential uh, descriptions, focusing on community, social life, capacities, etc. So some of the questions that you could discuss in the discussion forum today or throughout the week include the following. Do you agree with Z. Frank's criterion for personhood? And what about Warren's criterion for personhood? Do you agree with her? What do you think the criterion for personhood should be? How do the definitions of concepts influence the application of ethics on the ground? Should the future potential to develop these traits be given weight in the abortion debate? And remember, this is a live issue here. And is Warren correct when she argues that the unborn do not meet the criterion of personhood? Do you agree or disagree? So there's so much material to discuss here. There's such a richness in questions, in the discussion concerning personhood. And I'm very much interested in hearing your thoughts on the issue if you feel comfortable discussing it. So thank you guys very much. I will see you on Friday. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. But I hope you have a great week.